How's it going, people? Hope you're doing well. Recently I made a video called John Lennon and the Art of Humanity, where I take a look at his work on the White Album and also take a brief look at, his personal life and how those go together. John gave a very humane performance on the White Album, I would say. It covers a vast range of emotions and it really characterizes what was going on in his life at the time. But, John, while he was undoubtedly exceptional, I think it's sort of fair to say that he was not exceptional in the Beatles vacuum, seeing as he was working with Paul McCartney the entire time, and you can't not mention George Harrison or Ringo Starr as well, but Paul McCartney for sure. And Paul McCartney's the other half of the famed Lennon McCartney duo, who's probably the most famous songwriting partnership of all time. And Paul McCartney also shines on the White Album. Paul and John dominated the White Album for the most part. There's not too many George or Ringo songs, especially when you consider the fact that George is really coming into his own at this point. Paul and John really dominate the album here. And yeah, so just to name a few of the songs, Paul did Back in the USSR, Helter, Skelter, Honey Pie, Martha My Dear, Blackbird, Rocky Raccoon, Obla Di Obla Da. The list really goes on and on. I mean, it's a huge album, about an hour and a half. But, all of those songs are great in their own right. And I did talk about Back in the USSR in a separate Beatles video that I did. But Back in the USSR I find really interesting because it's sort of like this Beach Boys sound, but applied to USSR themes rather than American themes. And I think this is great. I think it's supreme trolling from back in the day, and I love it. Further, you have this Obla Di Obla Da song, which goes into the Back in the USSR sort of theme, because Paul was so good at taking influences and doing them extremely well. I mean, Obla Di Obla Da is a Jamaican influence song, believe it or not. It just, again, it goes to show how great Paul was at almost mastering other sounds. And another piece of evidence for this is Honey Pie, which is this 1920s-esque style, I guess. But it's about this love interest that whoever's writing the song, it was Paul, but I don't think Paul was writing about himself. But regardless, it's about this love interest that's sailed across the sea to America, and she's a star on the silver screen. It's a cute song. It really works, and again, it goes to show how great Paul was as a musical artist. You also have Rocky Raccoon, which I mentioned, that I've just recently sort of fell in love with, because it's like this Western style song, and it's got some tack piano into it, which I really love. It's got a saloon type of feel, and it's also, it's lyrically impressive. Like, if you imagine yourself back in the cowboy old Western days, Wild Wild West days, you could definitely picture this being sung in some sort of saloon while you spit into a bucket. At the end of the day, what this really is simply the ability from Paul to create something everlasting and something so beautiful from almost nothing. I mean, take Martha My Dear, which almost all Beatles fans would remember the piano from, and it's just a song about his dog. Whereas if you just listen to the first time on a surface level, without doing research into the origins of the song, you would think it's just this silly love song. I mean, it's great how Paul can do that. And you also have Blackbird, and while it's not derived from anything, seeing as it's about, civil rights movements and racial tensions, it still goes to show how Paul can mask it so beautifully, because you think it's just this poetic song about maybe nature or love, but no, it's about black rights at the time, not just African American rights, because they're obviously English. As a little side note here, we can't not mention Helter Skelter, which is maybe the origins of heavy metal, if not contributed to it. And then meanwhile, you have Your Blues, which I mentioned in the John video, but it's overlooked in the sense of, origins of heavy metal, like Helter Skelter has been famed to be. But it's sort of this idea of the rivalry of John, which I love on this album, because they were going crazy. They were both team of the year in form players, if you get that reference on this album. I mean, it's fantastic. And just like John, Paul has the full range of emotions on the album. Take that Helter Skelter song of this, you know, on the edge of insanity sort of song. And you have Martha My Dear, which is a very sober song about love for your dog. I mean, come on, it's just the full range of humanity. And so while the White Album can be labeled as not having an obvious theme like Sgt. Pepper's or Magical Mystery Tour with psychedelia and, like, you know, sort of these trippy, thought-provoking songs, the White Album could be labeled as a supremely human album, whether or not it was intentional. Both Paul McCartney and John Lennon are doing this, and so was George Harrison, by the way, which unfortunately there's not enough George songs on the album to make a video about. But, you know, he's got Piggies, which is this anti-capitalist song, and then he's got Savoy Truffle, which is continuing down the psychedelia route, but he's still doing it too. I don't know, it's just, it goes to show how Paul, while trying to keep the band together after Brian Epstein, their manager's passing, was going through his own human existence on the album, which I feel we sort of forget about when we listen to our favorite artist's music. I mean, perhaps not so much these days because we know so much about our favorite artist's life, but when artists feel so far away, like the Beatles especially, we tend to forget about their human existences on the album. And that's why the White Album really shines for me, is because it's so obvious, I feel, about especially Paul McCartney and John Lennon's human existence. And so yeah, that's probably going to be it for the Art of Humanity videos with McCartney and John Lennon. I hope you enjoyed. Share it with someone. Have a great day, and peace and love.